The moment I saw him crawling through a burst pipe access tunnel with a headlamp strapped to his forehead and a wrench the size of my forearm tucked under his arm, I knew I was in serious trouble. My name is Stellan Voss. I'm 34 years old, and I have spent the last 9 years climbing transmission towers, rerouting fault currents, and talking linemen down from bad decisions in the middle of lightning storms. I am not a man who rattles easily. I have held a live 13,200-volt splice in a rainstorm and kept my hands steady. I have worked through a Category 2 derecho with nothing between me and the sky but a hard hat and a prayer. But watching Cormac back out of that tunnel, mud on his jaw, safety glasses pushed up on his forehead, completely unbothered by the fact that a secondary pressure line had just blown 6 feet to his left, that rattled me. That rattled me down to the fillings in my back teeth. It was the first Tuesday of November. Denver had been hammered overnight by a freak early season cold snap. Not a blizzard, just enough ice on the roads to make the city mean. And the Platte Valley water treatment facility had already been running a skeleton crew when the accident happened. A contractor had hit an unmarked conduit junction with a boring machine at 6:47 a.m. The strike sheared through both a high-voltage feed line and a water main simultaneously. Two systems that were never supposed to share the same subsurface corridor. By the time I got the emergency dispatch call, the facility's backup switching station was on fire. 3 pumping units were offline, and approximately 180,000 Denver households were 40 minutes away from losing pressure entirely. I pulled into the facility lot with my truck still steaming from the drive and got my first look at the chaos. Fire crews were on the northeast corner. 2 of my colleagues from XCell's Emergency Response Division were already suiting up at the gate, and standing in the middle of the access road, completely calm, holding a laminated schematic in one hand and a coffee thermos in the other, was a man I had never seen before. Wait, because what he said next stopped every person within earshot cold. Your fault current is backfeeding through the grounding grid into our chlorination system, he said. Not to me, to the incident commander. If you de-energize junction 7 before you isolate the secondary neutral, you're going to electrify the effluent pond. I need 5 minutes before anyone touches that switching panel. The incident commander looked at me. I looked at the stranger. The stranger looked at his schematic, then at me, and said, "You're XL's grid tech?" "Stellan Voss," I said. "Cormac Leith, Denver Water." He held out the schematic. "Tell me I'm wrong." I took the schematic. I was not wrong. Neither was he. That was how it started. Not with a handshake, not with small talk, but with the 2 of us, crouched over a laminated diagram in a freezing access road, while a switching station smoldered behind us, and someone's radio crackled with updates no one had time to process. Cormac had already mapped the fault pathway. He'd done it in the 20 minutes between the contractor's strike and my arrival, using nothing but the facility's as-built drawings, and what I would later learn was an almost compulsive habit of memorizing infrastructure, schematics the way other people memorize song lyrics. I have worked with a lot of engineers. I have worked with brilliant ones, cautious ones who second-guess themselves into paralysis, and ones who move so fast they miss the thing that kills you. Cormac was something else. He was precise in a way that felt physical, like watching a surgeon or a chess player, someone for whom the gap between knowing a thing and doing a thing had been compressed to almost nothing. Backfeed path goes through the grounding mat, through the soil column, into the steel casing on Pump House 3's inlet pipe, he said, tracing it with one finger. If the chlorine dosing system is still energized and that casing gets live current, the electrochemical reaction could off-gas chlorine dioxide into the enclosed pump house. How much? Enough to clear the building in under 2 minutes, possibly enough to reach the neighboring residential block if the wind shifts. I looked at the windsock on the facility's south fence. It was pointing northeast, directly at a subdivision of about 400 homes. "Okay," I said. "Walk me through your isolation sequence, and I'll tell you where it conflicts with the grid side." He did. It took 11 minutes. At the end of those 11 minutes, We had a joint sequence that neither of us had arrived with. Something built in the space between our two systems, in the overlap where high voltage met water chemistry, met the specific, unglamorous reality of what Denver's infrastructure looked like underground. The incident commander signed off. We executed, nobody got hurt. But here's the part that stayed with me long after the paperwork was filed. When it was over, when the backfeed was isolated and the pump houses were cleared and the pressure was restored, and the fire crews were rolling up their hoses, Cormac sat down on the running board of my truck, took off his hard hat, and just exhaled. Not dramatically, just a slow, complete breath, like a man setting down something heavy. I sat down next to him without really deciding to. Good sequence, I said. You caught the neutral issue I missed on step 4, he said. That would have been bad. You caught the chlorination issue I didn't even know existed. That would have been worse. He turned and looked at me then. Not the way you look at a colleague, the way you look at someone when you're trying to decide something. You want coffee? He said. I have a thermos, and I'm told it's actually good. It's 8:30 in the morning, and I've been awake since 4, I said. Yes, he poured. The coffee was, in fact, good. Dark and slightly oversteeped, the way I've always liked it, but never mentioned to anyone because it seems like a strange thing to have a preference about. I don't know how he made it that way. I didn't ask. I just drank it and watched the fire crews finish their work and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was sitting next to someone who operated at the same frequency I did. We exchanged numbers that day for professional reasons. At least, that's what I told myself. Interagency coordination. Best practice after a joint incident. Completely standard. He texted me that evening. Found the contractor's as-built error that caused the boring strike. Want to see it? I said yes. He sent a photograph of a hand-annotated survey map, the kind of careful, meticulous markup that takes hours and exists because someone couldn't stop thinking about a problem after they were supposed to be done with it. I stared at that photograph for longer than was strictly necessary. You mapped the whole corridor. I typed, couldn't sleep, he wrote back. You? Same, I said, which was true, though the reason I couldn't sleep had quietly shifted from the incident to something else entirely. We started meeting for coffee, not every day. We were both too busy for that, but with a regularity that started to feel intentional. After the 3rd time, and unmistakable after the 5th. He'd pick the place, always somewhere near the South Platte, always with good light in the morning. I don't think he did it consciously. I think he just liked being near the water. He spent his days protecting. I learned things about Cormac Leith over those weeks in the way you learn things about someone when you're paying attention but pretending not to, that he'd grown up in Laramie and come to Denver for the water authority job and stayed because he couldn't imagine leaving the mountains at his back, that he had a younger sister in Portland. He called every Sunday, that he kept a worn copy of a hydrology textbook in his truck that he'd had since graduate school, its margins dense with pencil notes, that he made eye contact when he listened in a way that most people don't, a way that made you feel like what you were saying was the only thing happening in the room. I learned that he'd been careful the way people are careful when they've been careless before, and it cost them something. I recognized that I had been careful for a long time too. Don't miss what happened on the 3rd Tuesday of December, because it changed everything. The second incident came 73 days after the first. This time it wasn't a contractor error. A cold snap had caused a subsurface pipe failure in the facility's chemical feed system. Hydrofluosilicic acid, the compound used for water fluoridation, leaking into a shared utility vault that also housed a medium-voltage switching cabinet. The combination was not immediately explosive, but the acid vapor was corrosive enough to damage cable insulation, and if the switching cabinet shorted, the resulting arc flash would be unsurvivable for anyone in the vault. They called me because the switching cabinet was mine. They called Cormac because the chemical feed was his. We suited up in the parking lot, full arc flash PPE for me. 40-calorie suit, face shield, voltage-rated gloves, chemical splash protection for him, standing next to each other in the cold, getting our gear checked, not saying much. Same sequence logic as last time? He asked. Mostly. I need to de-energize from the upstream source before you cap the feed line. Sequence matters. It always does, he said. Then quieter. You okay? It was a simple question, the kind people ask without meaning much by it. But Cormac asked it the way he did everything, carefully, like he wanted an actual answer. I keep being, I said, which was something my father used to say. A man who'd worked outdoor construction his whole life and had a particular relationship with the phrase fine. Cormac looked at me for a moment. Me too, he said. We went in. The vault work took 40 minutes. It required the two of us to be in close quarters. Physically close, the kind of close that the width of a shared utility space imposes, where you're aware of the other person's breathing and the sound of their movements and the specific, focused way they hold themselves when they're doing something that demands everything they have. I handed him a fitting he needed without being asked. He held a cable clear of my work without being asked. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. When we came out and pulled our hoods back, his face was flushed from the heat inside the gear. There was a small streak of grime on his jaw. In almost exactly the same place, there had been mud on the day we met. I noticed this. I catalogued it. I said nothing. Good work, he said. You too. We stood there in the parking lot in our gear for a moment, the city going about its day around us. And I thought, I am going to have to say something eventually. I am going to have to decide whether this is something I'm willing to reach for. I thought about careful. I thought about cost. I handed him my coffee thermos. I'd brought one this time. And he took it. And when our gloved hands were both on it for a second, neither of us moved. That pause lasted 3 seconds, but I have replayed it approximately 300 times. I asked him to dinner the following Friday. Not coffee, dinner. A specific word I chose, with specific intent, and we both knew it. He said yes without hesitating, which was, I realized, exactly how Cormac Leith did everything that mattered to him. Without hesitation and with his full attention, we went to a place in Rhino he'd been wanting to try. Low lit, good food, the kind of restaurant that's loud enough to feel private. We talked for 3 hours, not about infrastructure, not about incident reports, about Wyoming winters, and what it felt like to leave a place, and whether leaving was always a loss or whether sometimes it was the thing that let you become someone. About his sister's kid, who'd just started walking. About my father, who hadn't anymore. Parkinson's. Slow and steady, the way that particular thief works. Does he know what you do? Cormac asked. Your dad. He thinks I climb towers and flip switches, I said. Which is accurate, technically, but not complete. No, I said. Not complete. He looked at me across the table. What's the complete version? I thought about it. I keep the lights on, I said. Literally. When something breaks in the system, something that would leave a neighborhood dark, or cold, or unsafe, I go find it, and I fix it, usually in the middle of the night, usually in bad weather. The complete version is that I do it because I can't imagine not doing it, because the idea of those houses going dark, and there being something I could have done. I stopped. Yeah, Cormac said quietly. I know exactly what you mean. He did. I could see that he did. He spent his days making sure that when anyone in Denver turned on a tap, what came out was clean and safe and reliable. Not because anyone thanked him for it, but because the alternative was unthinkable to him. We were, I realized, the same kind of person, the kind that can't look away from a system in distress. And then he said something I wasn't expecting. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you something, he said. He turned his water glass slowly on the table, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his version of gathering himself since about the 3rd week. Tell me, I said. I don't do things halfway, he said. I've tried. It doesn't work. So, I need you to know that if this is something, whatever this is, I'm going to be all the way in it. And that might be a lot. The restaurant was loud around us. Someone laughed at the bar. A waiter moved past with a tray. Cormac, I said. Yeah, I've been up since 4 a.m. on a workday to drive to a water treatment facility twice in 2 months because I wanted to make sure you were okay before I made the work calls, I said. I think we're past the point where you being all the way in something is going to scare me off. He looked at me for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not a full smile, not yet, just the beginning of one. The controlled release of something held carefully for a long time. Okay, he said. Okay, I said. That was December. By February, he had a drawer in my apartment, and I had a key to his truck, which is how Cormac Leith understands trust. Not in grand gestures, but in the small functional ones, the kind that say, I am accounting for you in the logistics of my life. We had a ritual by then. On nights when one of us had been on a difficult call, a bad fault, a contamination scare, anything that left the particular residue that emergency work leaves, we'd check in, not a debrief, just, you okay? I keep being. Me too. It sounds small. It wasn't. In March, there was a third incident, a wildfire northwest of Denver that threatened the watershed for the facility's primary reservoir intake. Cormac spent 4 days coordinating with Jefferson County on ash event protocols, running turbidity projections, rerouting intake valves. I spent the same 4 days on mutual aid with fire crews, protecting transmission infrastructure along the US 6 corridor. We were 30 miles apart the whole time, and in contact maybe 6 times a day, brief and operational. Status, status, all clear, status. On the 4th evening, when the fire was contained and the watershed was intact, and the sky over Denver had turned that particular smoky amber that wildfire season brings, he pulled into my driveway. I was sitting on the front steps. He got out of his truck, walked over, and sat down next to me, without a word. We sat like that for a while, the city below us settling into its evening routines, the mountains going dark against a copper sky. He put his hand over mine on the step between us. I turned my hand over. There is a camera at the entrance to the Platte Valley facility, a wide-angle security camera on a post near the main gate, the kind that records everything and no one ever watches. I know it's there because I've been badged through that gate a dozen times now. I like to think that somewhere in that footage, there's a frame from a Tuesday in early November. 2 men standing in a freezing access road over a laminated schematic, one of them holding a coffee thermos, neither of them yet knowing what the other one was going to mean to them. Just 2 people who happened to arrive at the same broken place at the same time and figured out, together, how to fix it. That's the thing about infrastructure work. You learn early that systems don't fail all at once. They fail at the junction points, the places where 2 different systems meet, where the design assumed a clean separation that reality never quite delivers. Those are the places that need the most attention. Those are the places where, if you're paying attention, you find the things you didn't know you needed. Cormac Leith was a junction point I didn't see coming. I'm glad I didn't look away.